So 1 second here, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Hey, San, Ali Hoop. I'm so glad that my home chapter, my peeps, asked me to do this. And it actually came about when we were having a Diane Larson, one of our members, did an impromptu Zoom after we, Biden and Harris were declared winners, and, we had champagne going, and everybody was feeling good, and they got me at a good time. They were like, will you do it after work with us and talk about the DNC? And I was like, of course. So then the next day when I came to my senses, I said, of course I'm going to ask my fellow DNC colleagues to come on because I don't know everything. I'm still learning, and we all have a combination of knowledge and experience. This is Joe's second term on the DNC, I believe. Katie's coming back. I've learned so much from both of them over the time I've been in DA. And I just wanted to let you know that the other two members who are not on the call, they are both in the Asia-Pacific region. So this time would not have worked for them, but don't take their absence as a sign of anything other than bad time zone coordination. So with that, I like to call this demystifying the DNC because I'm going to get demystified with some things that we talk about tonight too. And I've learned some things with putting this presentation together from Katie and from Joe. So you hear that term a lot, the DNC, just to make sure you know that's an abbreviation for the Democratic National Committee, but not to be so easy, it can also be the abbreviation for the Democratic National Convention that comes around every 4 years. But in this term, in this context, we're going to talk about the National Committee. It's been around since 1848, and as we would say in Sweden, it's the styrelsen. It's the body that pretty much governs the Democratic Party. They have a lot of things that they have to do, and some of that is, the strategy for Democratic Party candidates. We always talk about down ballot, so from every office, from national office down to local and state. And I want to say here that my colleagues, Joe, Julia, Martha, Katie, feel free to jump in at any time, because this is not just me talking. I'm just running through, but please jump in at any time. One of the things that it does is organize the convention that we just had this summer. How many people saw Julia give the roll call for Democrats Abroad by the Charles Bridge? Wasn't that amazing? That was wonderful. Some of us who've been to the convention before, you're usually in the room and you stand up and the camera zooms in on you, but the way they did it this year was a wonderful thing. So that's an important thing that they do. We also, the DNC also puts together the platform, which gets voted on from the convention or during the convention. The party supports candidates. I can't say that. What do you guys think about this? I know that there are some candidates that it seems like they get hand selected to get more support than others. There's different, we said we were going to talk, is this a time to talk about the alphabet, like the DCC and DL?
Yeah, I think that would be a good time, because I think that's the right time to do it.
Do it, Joe, because I still get confused.
So as Adrian said, the DNC does support candidates, but it is not alone in that. And there's something we call the alphabet soup, which are Democratic. They're not Democratic Party. It's not the Democratic Party, but they are Democratic entities. So there's something called the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, which is comprised of the Democratic senators in Congress, and that committee raises money to support Democratic candidates for Senate, whether they are incumbents or running against either for an open seat or against a Republican. It also, the DSCC, as it's called, Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, DSCC, also goes out to try to find candidates for Senate in the various states. Then there's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, or as it is called, the DCCC, or sometimes just D-Trip, to make it even more confusing.
Or more cool.
And the DCCC is the House equivalent of the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. That is, it is comprised of the Democratic members of the House of Representatives, and it raises money for them and for candidates for the House of Representatives. It also has a role in trying to recruit candidates for races across the country. And then you have, and so a candidate for those offices has her own sources of funds, her own campaign funds, the possible funds from the Democratic National Committee, possibly some funds from the DSCC, possibly some funds for the DTRIP, and then there's something else entirely different, which is the Association of State Democratic Committees. It used to be the Association of State Democratic Chairs when I was on it, and that is the association of all the state chairs and vice chairs of the state and territorial parties. It is also a democratic entity, but it is not, and its president sits as a member on the board of the Democratic National Committee, but it is not the same entity as the DNCC. It doesn't have any particular activity in helping candidates for Congress because it's brief, and Julia, correct me, and Katie too, and Ken too, for that matter, all of us.
You know what, guys? I forgot to say, Joe's a former chair, aren't you? International chair.
Yeah, thank you. I was, yes, a long time ago when my hair was brown.
By the way, the alphabet soup is in the chat box if you guys wanted to see the letters and the names too.
Okay.
And Katie, jump in. I saw you put your hand up, so just when Joe finishes, please jump in.
So the ASDC's brief is actually to represent the state parties with the DNC, and sometimes a little bit of a tension between the state parties and the national committee. So it can be a very difficult divide. Its goal, in fact, is to support the state parties in their states, and it's also a very vital institution. And I think that's the end of the alphabet, isn't that? I think so. Then there's other things like FEC, Federal Elections Commission, and stuff like that. But I'll stop there. And then Katie, I can't actually see the chat box.
Oh, so the only thing.
So Adrian, your fan is making some noise. You might want to mute.
Yes.
First of all, Sweden, thank you for hosting us. And Adrian, thanks for the invitation. And hello to everybody else who is listening in. I'd like to go back to the original question, which I thought was, does the DNC support candidates? And I would like to say really clearly that the DNC supports nominees. The DNC is making things better for any candidate who's running at any level across the United States. They're giving them tools that they need, but they're keeping an even and a fair playing field so that anyone can run. And many of you know this was thrown into our face in 2015 and 2016 when the leaking emails showed that there was some preference within the DNC. Whether it was effective preference or not, it's unclear, but there was some preference for Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. And this helped to bring about the Unity Reform Commission and the reforms, and it helped to remind the DNC what our job is. And our job is not to anoint or to support candidates. It's to help all candidates and then really support nominees. Now, some of the stuff that Joe was talking about does some selection of candidates before primaries are over, but that is not the DNC. So that's the part I wanted to throw in. Julie, I think you're next.
Thanks. Yeah, because we'll elaborate on that as well. So thanks, Katie.
And in fact, it's interesting because the DNC shares the same building with some of these organizations, but they have to have a very, very separate life. Because the DNC is trying so hard to remain neutral for these candidates. one thing I just wanted to talk a little bit more about is the way the DNC supports state parties. So this is an important part, just as Joe said, the Association of State Democratic Committees is advocating for parties. And so Ken Martin, for example, we just signed a letter, all 57 states signed a letter that we sent to the DNC saying that we want our next DNC chair to be someone who supports the 57 state strategy and a bunch of other points underneath that. And it's a really important thing because we know that in 2016 and prior to that, the DNC was not supporting all 57 states. And we're trying to move them back to the 57 state strategy that the DNC had under Howard Dean. So it's a really important example of some of the advocacy work the ASDC does. The DNC also does a lot of support with the state parties. For example, they provide funding to all the states plus Washington, D.C. for a certain amount of money every year. We continue to work to get that funding for ourselves as well. In the meantime, we also fight for different grants. The DNC has not been a fantastic supporter of Democrats abroad. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. It's something that we don't rely on, but they do support the state parties largely because they are candidate driven. They are looking at making sure the states can build good pools of candidates. It's something that my argument with them is, look, you guys can't just go for candidates. You also need to go for voter registration. That's what we do, and your state parties would be well served if they did that too. So that's one of the big arguments that we're having with them right now. But
Julia, and what you were going to say, or you have some information that I don't think the rest of us have, because I have on this that the DNC chair and officers are elected by DNC members. Now, that hasn't always been the case. I don't know. I know the first time I was DNC member, we elected the new officers. Some people have been asking me, who's going to be the next chair? Do we get to vote on who the next chair is going to be?
Well, actually, it's a presidential appointee if it's a Democratic candidate,
right.
If we have a Democratic president. So as far as I understand, and the good news is there's a 99.99999% chance, from what I'm hearing from Ken Martin and other folk, that Jamie Harrison is going to be our next chair. So that's who everyone is.
Julia, just to jump in, we do need to have an election. We will have an election. When we have the White House, then the president can tell us who he or she wants us to elect. But it's in the bylaws of the DNC and the charter, the same way that our members elect the chair of Democrats abroad. So it is our duty as DNC members to hold elections for all of the officers.
Is that a new bylaw change, Katie? Or is
it's been in the bylaws probably since we were founded in the 1800s. It's always been in the bylaws and the charter. We have elections. But when we have the White House, the president is the head of the party and has a lot to say about nominating a person to lead the DNC. And not many people would contest that nomination that comes from the White House. And if they did, they wouldn't be successful. But we will have an election. We will elect the officers, and we'll do it, early in the year next year.
So another thing that the DNC does is, we all know this, facilitate the Democratic presidential nominating process. Some of what Katie talked about, we're going to come on to. I originally was going to show you a little clip for what the DNC War Room is, but those of you that are in the leadership, or maybe you signed up on your own, it's, a team of communicators they put together to counter Trump and Republican messaging. Grassroots organizers are so important to the Democratic Party, so they started organizing Core 2020 and started recruiting people last year to make sure we had people in the key states. The DNC has invested a lot in technology. Julia and Alex have worked a lot with his technology team. Is there anything you want to say about them?
Well, the technology team right now, they've been supporting our wiki for years, and they just gave us a chance of funding to move the wiki from a server solution, for example, to the cloud. So that's small details, but it makes a big difference for our bottom line when they do that support for us. The other thing I would bring up is voter protection. The DNC has in the past few years grown a really pretty strong voter protection team that is participating not only in legal cases like what Joe was talking about. In fact, the DNC was very instrumental in fighting against that Pennsylvania case, in the Donald J. Trump case against Brokfar. So Mark Elias and the DNC have been in tons and tons of legal cases across the United States this year. but they've also worked with key states on voter protection. They have voter protection directors in many of these key states, and they've been really helping build and give them tools they can use and make sure the information is spread across all the states, that the communications are, everybody has the same set of tools and understanding about what they should be looking for, which I think is really important. I love the director there. Raina is Walter Morgan is wonderful, and I really appreciate all of her support that she's given us. In fact, I'm going to be meeting with her tomorrow to talk about Georgia, along with a bunch of other DNC people, because Georgia is such an important thing for the DNC. And of course, with Georgia, it is not a super duper state in terms of voter protection. So we have to do
one thing, Julia, I don't know if you ever got a satisfactory answer why, the DNC did great with the I Will Vote website. They revamped it and they kept it current. And when it became apparent that mailboxes or voter boxes were apparent, they would let you come in and see where your closest drop-off place was going to be. They had it in Spanish, but they didn't really let us push vote from abroad.
They didn't. That was, with the DNC, you can't, one has to, just like the ASDC, where sometimes the ASDC has to push back against the DNC, the state parties have to do that too. And sometimes it's just our job to say, we really believe this is a very important thing, and you push at all levels. But there's someone in the IT team who did not want to use vote from abroad, and they were the one who put the kibosh on it. And very unfortunate. It's something we just have to keep on pushing. With over 3 million hits on vote from abroad this year, and I think it's safe to say that it's a very sturdy site, and we don't have anything to worry about. But
well, good for us. And I can say Martha and I were on that. I don't know if Katie and Ken were on there, but Martha and Joe, if you got a chance, but Martha and I were on that call that the DNC did with President-elect Biden. And normally they don't have the chat box open, but we were on there and we were like, oh my God, the chat box open. So I'm like, hey, so I'm from Sweden, and Martha's like, hi from the Netherlands, and people are like, oh my God, the chat box is open. And then 2 seconds later it was closed, right?
Well, good thing you guys got in there.
We got in there. So then when Tom Perez started to speak, he's like, we got people from Guam, we got people from Sweden. I was like, oh, he said Sweden. And then he was saying, thanks to the different state parties, and he was like, thanks to Democrats abroad for the overseas vote. So, when we didn't think we got respect before, and we all know the whole world was looking at us when they were talking about, the military votes coming in, the UCAVA vote, the overseas vote. People like, that's out.
We've been telling that story for years and years, and they do know us as the margin of victory state. Sometimes I'm called Julia the margin of victory.
She is. I say that's your nickname. And the reason on this side, I said the new Democratic National Committee, and Katie alluded to it when she talked about, how things were seen as not being fair under Wasserman Schultz. You never hear about her
Wasserman Schultz, exactly.
Never hear about her anymore. But
good reason, yes.
But things weren't necessarily fair. So, we were coming in to get new leadership and how they built from the ground up. And one of the things, and Martha, can you talk about this, or Ken, because I was going to click through to what these were, but we passed historic reforms to give the grassroots a bigger voice. And Martha, I know you're there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know that was something we were proud to vote about.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm happy to do that. Adrian and I were both, we're in our second term, so we were both elected to the DNC in 2016, which of course was a very special year in many ways. And our first full DNC meeting, the DNC meeting, the DNC representation, the community meets twice a year. So there's always a winter meeting and a summer meeting. Sometimes summer meetings in October. Winter meeting is usually in either after the inauguration or February, March. So our first meeting was in February 2017 in Atlanta, where we elected 9 hours voting to elect the new leadership of the DNC. But I think our 4 years were really a lot about this new DNC, about passing reforms, about really responding, I think, to everything that was going on in our country, in the world, and really listening to what people were wanting from the DNC, and also just kind of addressing the whole atmosphere of suspicion and concern and surprise out there with the election of Donald Trump. So there was really I would say, a really tremendous opportunity to bring reforms to the DNC. So that was one of the things that we actually worked on for a number of years in the last 4 years. So first of all, electing a new leadership that would take those reforms forward. And I have to say that was quite a thing to do as a brand new DNC member at our very first meeting usually these elections are like not that big a deal. Like people don't know what the DNC is and they don't really know what the leadership does. And, who cares who's the chair of the DNC or the vice chair or whatever. But this was really kind of, we were really in the limelight in terms of this election. And there was really remarkable participation. We started out, and Katie was organizing that, like, let's do a call with those, 2 people who are running for DNC chair. And we ended up doing WebEx sessions with 30, 35 different candidates. There was chair, and then there were more candidates for chair, there was vice chair, and it was like, wow.
Secretary, treasurer, everybody.
Everything. Like, this is our moment to, meet these people. And, of course, we can hear who they are, but they can hear who we are, right? They could really be, come to understand, what Democrats Abroad is. Because, honestly, we are so digital, right? We were already so digital 4 years ago. So how many state parties were doing WebEx sessions with their DNC members with candidates for chair like us, right? So it was really like our opportunity to really stand out and build those relationships. So whether those candidates were successful or not, we had an opportunity to really extend our network and to have, everybody really understand really well who Democrats Abroad is, the difference that we can make. So I think that that's really kind of a good example of what DNC, what your DNC representatives do is find those moments where we can really bring our message about what a difference Democrats Abroad can make, and about how many Americans are living overseas, and really kind of highlight all of us and all of you and everything that we're doing. So so that was how we started, and of course the big job over the last 4 years were these historic reforms that are mentioned here on this slide. There was a lot of criticism of the role of superdelegates. There was kind of a feeling like the 2016 nomination process hadn't been as fair as it could have been, that there was kind of a shadow hanging over them, that a lot of DNC members like ourselves, who at that time were superdelegates, we weren't, but others were, who had already, some of them, not everybody, but had already expressed a preference for a candidate, and that sort of put a shadow over the primaries that were still going on in different states. So there were really questions, and I think it's a really a good process for us to go through, is to really look at our rules on a regular basis. And yesterday's reform is today's problem, right? I mean, every time you try to fix something, that's great, but you find more areas where you can make things work better. So the Unity Reform Commission was really terrific. You can watch the sessions that were held. It's really an amazing, both history lesson as well as an opportunity to really see the kind of conversations that happened. But they're all on YouTube, and there were also people from DA who went and flew in and took part and listened to some of those. But that was really an opportunity to say, okay, how can we do this better? How can we do a better job nominating our candidates? How can we have more participation? How can we have more inclusion? What about all these caucuses that happen somewhere in the middle of the winter in a barn where, people who have jobs or kids or, whatever are not going to show up, or in wheelchairs? How do we make our party more inclusive? And then, what does that take? In some cases, these primaries or caucuses are really in the hands of the Democratic Party, but there's also, legislation. And there's also states that are going to prescribe what the rules are. So some things we can change on our own, and some things require legislation. So let's take some first steps. Let's really come from, let's be inclusive, let's be democratic, let's change what we can. And, one of the points there was really, let's make the party diverse and inclusive, right? Let's make sure that we really reach out to all of our constituencies. And that's why I'm really glad to see how in the last few years our caucuses and Democrats Abroad have really grown, because those are really our vehicles to make sure that we are a diverse and inclusive organization, and we give voice to all of the different constituencies. And I think we made a really good start with that. So as far as these reforms go, we did reform I don't know if there's other slides on that or if it's just this one, but we did vote in Chicago.
Yeah, Martha, I'm sorry. When I did this, I thought we would be able to click through and read them, but I think it was Chicago, and I know it was the superdelegates session.
It was Chicago, yep.
And it was 2018 then, right? So Chicago was the summer meeting in 2018, and
August 22nd.
There you go. And it was amazing. It was intense. You know, it was, again, like really under the spotlight. It was in the news, you know, all of that about, like, were we going to, as superdelegates, able to diminish our own role, in essence, really like vote as a body to say, instead of being part of the first round of voting and having an oversized say in who the nominee is going to be, and I'm not going to say that's valid or invalid. There are really reasons why that was done. There could be a nominee that is really not appropriate, that you would want to have some opportunity to overrule CC Republican Party 2016 Donald Trump. But in any case, that was put in place at a certain point in time in the past. Were we going to redefine our role to take ourselves out of that first round of voting? And so it was pretty amazing conversations, very passionate, you know, microphones in a couple of meetings that were closed because it's very hard to have the press in those kind of meetings, but pro and con and people being able to go up and just really speak from where they were coming from. And it was, I'm very proud of what we did.
Yep.
I think Catherine was waiting to jump in.
Catherine, is Katie?
Or Katie, I mean.
But I think maybe we want to hear from Ken. We haven't heard from Ken, and he was there from the beginning of the Unity Reform Commission and then all the way through Chicago. So Ken, did you want to jump?
And I want to introduce Ken by saying when we were voting for who the chair was going to be, when Tom Perez did not get in the first round, what did he do? Who did he come down to? He jumped down off that stage and ran over to Ken and Katie. Like, first thing, Ken and Tom Perez are like Buffalo Boys or something.
Yeah, exactly.
New York.
Yep.
And Ken is so loved at the DNC. Ken, thanks for coming in from Canada.
Ken, are you there?
Wait, unmute him?
Oh, you need to unmute.
Can I do that, or can he do
There you go. Oh, there you go. Speak. Try it now.
Go.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, we ourselves were being known as the committee that makes a difference. Our votes count. In the election of the chair, Keith Ellison and Tom Perez, I think we, among the 8 of us, said by the second ballot, we want to vote as a group. Our strength is in staying together as the to help our cause for funding and all those other things with the chair. And in the first round, we didn't know what it was going to be tight. We didn't know what the numbers would be. We voted 5-3 for 5 votes for Perez, and the other 3 votes were spread among the other candidates. And little did we know that Perez lost on the first round by 1 vote. And he knew that we had 3 votes being held for him on the second round. That's why he ran over to our delegation, and I think that that made a difference in the way we were treated for the whole of the year. Unfortunately, he didn't support funding for us yet, but we're still working on that.
But Ken and Katie wanted you to talk about what is your take on the Unity Reform process? Because as you said, you were there from the beginning.
I think there were probably 3 meetings actually where proposals were made, and it came down to the one that presently was adopted. I think, Julia, weren't you up as the first person at the microphone?
I was, yes.
Supporting
I was the first state chair to stand up and support it.
Yeah, she did a great job, and I think the unity of the way the 8 of us worked together was something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was
Me too. It was so fun. It was a wonderful team.
At any rate, I think that's enough.
Well, Katie, thanks, Ken. Katie, you had your hand up.
I'd like to kind of tie this conversation in with one of our previous conversation blocks, which was the election and then the need for reform. We've been talking earlier about, do we vote or do we not vote? When we lose, we vote. And because we lost in 2016, there was no leader of the party. And that's why we had this 3 or 4 month campaign with 10 candidates for the DNC chair. And it was an amazing time to really look at the party and really look at the need for reforms. And every one of those candidates did. And so did everybody who was voting for them. So it made it a really exciting and really, introspective time to try to figure out what do we need to do differently so that we can be more fair and so we can win. So that's what made that campaign so exciting. And that's what we're not going to have this year. But because we had the need for reform, a true election, and then we worked hard over the next couple of years to make sure that those reforms happened. We're in a better place now. We were in a better place for 2018, to spread out across the country and help in so many races that this blue wave happened, and it happened with the help of the DNC. And we were in a much better place in 2020 to work for Biden and Harris and to get them that win. So, it's just all part of it. And then one little thing I would say, because that election and the beginning of the Unity Reform Commission was the end of my first term, so I was around in the DNC. But if some of you, and I'm looking at the list, maybe not everybody, are going to remember that actually in 2016, of the 8 DNC members of Democrats Abroad, about 5 of them did endorse early. They did come out for Hillary Clinton. And it was actually very controversial in Democrats Abroad because we were 69% voting for Bernie. So we were right there with all the other states in having the super delegate count not matching the popular vote. But the final statement is just that Democrats Abroad punched way above our weight during the reform process and then what led to the reform. They're looking at what the organization needed and then really playing for the few votes we have, playing a pretty key role in that election and being at every meeting and talking to every one of the candidates. They want to talk to every person. They were calling us and having a hard time finding us. So we pulled all 8 people together on WebEx calls and had an hour with each candidate where we interviewed them about what their plans were and if they included us. But as Martha said earlier, it was a great opportunity for us to make all of those candidates aware of who we are and what we do. And many of them are serving in the DNC now with a lot more knowledge about DA. So I'm muting my mic now. Thank you. Goodbye.
And the next one we may get a chance to vote on as chair. No, thanks, Katie. And part of what you said segues into this next slide that you said, we were part of, we helped the party reform and do better to help candidates and to reach out. And for this cycle, the DNC created, and when I say the DNC, and I do want to be clear, like they didn't ask us as members, do we think we should set up seat at the table? Do we think you should set up Mujeres Mobilized or New Blue Crew? Because the DNC is the members that you vote on, but it's also the elected people. But then it's like the staff, the people that get paid, that come to work at that building on South Capitol Street, that they're their assistant to this or whatever. And Joaquina, am I going to say her name right, Julia? Joaquina,
that's right. And Matoni.
Yeah, when we first met Joaquina Clayton, she's amazing. She's amazing. She's a young African American woman who was the assistant to the Black Caucus chair and the Women's Caucus chair. 2 of the biggest caucuses. I don't know how she got all the work done that she had to get done, but she's worked her way up to special assistant to chair Tom Perez. And I think at that level, she said, or maybe before she got up there, she set up a program to reach Black women, African American women, to get them to vote. It was called Seat at the Table, to engage and organize with Black women. And they did programs all over the country. Then they had the Latinx, the Hispanic community reach out with Mujeres Mobilized. And then the new Blue Crew, which I didn't know that much about because I'm not a young student leader, but they reached out to young student leaders. So that's something that the DNC does that we, as your DNC members, the people that voted in, we're not part of setting that up, but then we amplify it. Like, they push the stuff out to us and say, we're going to do this. Now, Ken said he was going to have a meeting, I know, with his Canada chair. Again, I thought I was going to click through this, but we get emails from the DNC, and they sent us an email. And if I look at the date, this email was sent out to us on November 18th, and it was titled, The Democrats Rebuilt the DNC in One. And I'll just read some bullet points of what we did. Democrats, including the DNC and our sister committees, those alphabet committees that Joe mentioned, invested big over 4 years, and the result was wins across the board, including flipped the White House, gained 36 House seats and retook the majority, flipped 7 governor seats, gained 6 total Democratic state legislative majorities, broke 5 Republican supermajorities, gained 7 new Democratic supermajorities, flipped 4 Attorney General seats, flipped 4 Secretary of State seats, flipped 5 Treasurer seats, flipped 4 Senate seats, and flipped more than 400 state legislative seats. And there are other wins that aren't named on there that we know that we can celebrate. But that's what investment that started with the disappointment and failure in 2016, to the reforms that were made internally, to the internal staff, because basically they I don't know, there must have been a few people that they kept in that building, but they basically rebuilt the infrastructure from the ground up.
That is so true. I mean, don't you remember in May 2017 we went in there and there was almost no one there? I remember walking in the door and I was like, woo, I've been here before, and it was filled to the brim with people, and there's only I remember I met the COO, it was her very first day. She's like, very nice to meet you. We're trying to rebuild our staff. We have no one here, but maybe you'll find 1 or 2 people here. So it was amazing how they really started from scratch, and then they actually got rid of more people. They did it in waves, so it was not absolutely zero.
Yeah. So that's what they had to do. They had to start from scratch, clean house, and that's the results. And I know that a lot of us here in the press, depending on what press you're listening to, that we didn't have these big wins that we expected. That the turnout, the outcomes were disappointing. Wasn't like what the poll said, but the numbers. We've been winning races since 2017. So that's something that the DNC does. Again, Martha, Ken, Katie, just jump in whenever. And this is where I need your help. By the way, I just put into the chat box the link to the document Adrienne was talking about. Perfect. Thank you very much. And just I try to share as much of that on the DA Wiki. And that would have been on the weekend. It's on maintenance now. And I think I did put it up, and then Merle emailed me and said, a lot of stuff you put on the wiki isn't there anymore because we're doing maintenance or whatever. But these letters and communications that I get from the DNC, I share with leadership on the wiki. So as we were talking, we have 8 DNC members. This is where I need Katie and Ken and Joe and Martha and Julia to help me, because I don't really know all of the history about that. I know we have a half of a vote, and Joe told me that we started with a quarter of a vote and that it was a charter change. And I think, Katie, you must have added this, that we merged with the Democratic Party of the Panama Canal Zone. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues that know more about our history. Because I know we have, I'm sorry, I'll say one thing before, because I know we have a total of 4 votes, which is equal to many other state parties. Like I think Delaware has 4 votes.
Half of the other state parties.
About half of the other state parties.
Of them.
It's done by population. The algorithm is an interesting combination of voters and population. So
percent participation turnout at the primaries and 50% state population.
That's right. So go ahead, Joe. You want to tell us the history?
Well, Katie did well to add in the thing about the canal zone. What had happened was, remember, Democrats Abroad is formed officially in 1964 and recognized and attends in 1972 as observers of the 72 convention. And then in 1976, we're coming in and we're going to be recognized as Democrats Abroad, as a separate entity. But it's happening at the same time that we're about to give back the Canal Zone to Panama. The Canal Zone had been a territory, but there were elected DNC members from the Canal Zone. And so they had to figure out what to do with those people. And so we merged, the Democrats Abroad and the Canal Zone kind of merged. And the sitting DNC members from the Canal Zone were brought in to be members of Democrats Abroad's delegation as well. But when we were first founded, we only got a quarter of a vote each. We had a total of 2 votes because we were so little, but we only got a quarter of a vote each because we said, actually, well, wait, we have people all over the world. We need to have broad representation, and we can't do that if we only have 2 people, 1 with each vote. And so the answer was, okay, that's fine. We'll let you have your delegation of 8 folks, but we're only going to give you a quarter of a vote. And it was that way from 76, and I think it was up. I can't remember exactly whether it was in 2004, but it was a result of a charter change that was put forward by some labor union reps on the DNC from California to increase our delegation from not in number of people, but to give us a half a vote at the national level.
Joe, can I just ask you, how hard is it to get a charter change at the DNC?
Pretty
that
damn
sounds
hard.
Like it was huge. Yeah.
It's pretty damn hard. They don't. It's because as Martha, what did Martha say earlier? Something about if you change something and then you're gonna have to figure out what it really means. The charter changes are usually very difficult to get through. Although that also depends on what they are. For instance, there was a charter change recently which admitted the Northern Mariana Islands as a state, as a territorial committee. That was relatively uncontroversial. But other changes, structural changes, increasing the number of votes, for instance, is something. Then you're starting to talk about power, and that gets very difficult.
Yeah. Joe, can I throw something in here about the interesting thing about where we're listed in the charter and bylaws is we're not listed with the other votes that are allocated to other states. We are.
Correct.
Not, and we're listed when they name the 57. Actually, they go down to 52 or 53 instead of the 57 state parties, where they let the chair and the vice chair come in as DNC members. But then otherwise, DA is mentioned by itself in separate sentences in a few different places, saying that we have the members with a half vote each. So if we ever were to get a change, it doesn't affect the other numbers of other states. It doesn't affect that allocation where they're splitting up a big pool of votes among themselves, depending on their participation in population. In fact, the territories are left out of that as well. But I think that DC and Puerto Rico might be included. There are many different places you have to look in the charter and the bylaws to find out where all the DNC members come from, how the whole committee is formed. But it's funny, and DA, my point is, DA stands alone in many different places. So if a change was made to us then or in the future, it does not affect the numbers from other states. It affects their power, yeah, because, the total would change, but it wouldn't ever take votes as it's written now. It wouldn't take votes away from anybody else. If we were given more. And if we were given less, it wouldn't give them to anybody else either.
The reason, Katie, in fact, the reason we're standalone is because we didn't want to go in and start fussing around with the rest of the charter. Right? They put us where we are so that we didn't create potential conflict elsewhere.
Yeah. Can I jump in with just a logistical thing, Adrian and everybody? We're coming up to an hour. I wonder, I would love if people want to ask questions to get to a place where they could. So should we either run through the slides really quickly and then get to questions, or should we, maybe we're, I think
we're right on schedule.
Maybe we're not talking about what the people would like.
Well, you know what, Katie?
Do we want to take questions now, or should we?
We're right on schedule. We're on slide 13 and 19. Individual comments can always be kept shorter to allow for more time for questions at the end. But we're doing good. Questions have been rolling in the box that we're going to do later. And so that's a great. Stephanie did ask, when did the vote change from a quarter to a half a vote? Joe, if you can remember that. I know you said you couldn't really remember. But that's related to this slide. But just to let you know, like we said, we're 8 people, and we do come from every region. You know, we've got Julia here, Alex, as I said, and Aaron couldn't come because they're in the Asia Pacific. And I don't know what state Aaron votes in. That's why that's not there. I vote in D.C., which is always I queue up and say D.C. statehood. Joe is, I failed to mention I do have former chair. No, you updated that. Great. And Ken and Katie and Martha. So we're from the Americas, Asia Pacific, and EMEA. We're 4 men, 4 women. The chair and the vice chair are always included as ex officio. So what do we do as Democrats Abroad members? Like Katie mentioned, we're mentioned in the charter like so many different ways. I like to think of us as like the unicorns in the room, because we're the only state party that has members that vote in every other state party. We're the only state party that doesn't put up candidates in their own elections. But we're also the only people in the room that are talking about you guys and talking about your issues. Everyone's talking about the environment. Everybody's talking about labor. They're talking about health care. They're talking about, minimum wage. We're the only people that are talking about what unique situations that we have as Americans abroad. So we've got a lot of issues that are unique to us. So we go around and we tell those stories, and we tell them to other DNC members so they can in turn tell it to their legislators, where we can make real change. What else do we do? I know we attend caucus meetings. We're divided up. There's 4 regional caucuses, so 2 of us go to the Eastern, 2 go to Western, 2 go to Southern, 2 I'm in the Midwest. I go to Black Caucus meetings. We go to Women's Caucus meetings, LGBT. I'm like on the Veterans Council. I'm on the Labor Council. I'm on the Disabilities Council, Rural Caucus Council, so we can get all this information and share. What else is unique that we do as Democrats Abroad, DNC members, that other people don't do from other states? I think the main thing is that we fight for what's important to us. We tell our tax stories, our banking stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Stories about how we're disenfranchised.
Yep. Advocate for the issues that uniquely impact Americans who live abroad, because you know what? When we're not there, our issues aren't there.
Exactly right.
To all the other state parties, the DNC and candidates, that we've got the winning votes, that we help, that we send votes home to every state and every congressional district. And if it's close, then we're going to make the difference.
Absolutely.
It excites them. That excites them more than our issues.
As we just did in Georgia.
Yep, that's right. I'm sure you guys all know, but in Georgia, we sent about 19,000 votes back to Georgia, and we more than made up the 12,700 winning margin in Georgia. So that was really thrilling. And of course, we are working on that again with the Georgia Senate runoffs this January. So that's why the DNC is like, okay, we're getting on the phone, and let's see what we can do next, Julia. So
another
it's a really
thing
important thing
that she always impresses them with is the number of volunteers that we have.
That's right. Everyone loves our volunteers. We are a state party that has amazing teams. We get stuff done because of it. A lot of the states do not have that same volunteer structure. And if you look at the events that we have, we more than probably triple or quadruple the number of events that most state parties, even the biggest ones, would have across the year. So that's always. I remember in the Resistance Summer in 2017, guys, and they're like, Julia, are you making these numbers up? I'm like, no, we really did have these many events. This is just normal for us. And they'd come and they would show the events off to the other states and say, now see, this is what you guys can do too. It was fun.
Yeah. And we attend, pre-pandemic, as Marcus said, 2 meetings, winter and summer. That was in person. We had our first DNC meeting online. When was that? That was, it was after the election.
Last month.
Last month. See, everything is blending together. So we haven't had a full DNC meeting after the election. We had that call with President-elect, but we haven't had a full meeting. So another thing we do is we share expertise because, Julia, haven't you been teaching a lot of the state parties how to meet online?
That's right. So both the ASDC and the DNC asked me to get to come and just talk to all the different states about how best to really make an impact with the online webinars and through Zoom particularly. And so they realized that we had all that expertise. We went. It was kind of like a little show. I went to some of the state parties as well, and just talking about what you needed to do in order to do these webinars. And also they came to us about vote by mail because vote by mail is very new for very many of these states. And so they were like, okay, again, Julia, Democrats Abroad is a completely vote by mail state party. Please share your best practices. So that was a great time for us, where we were really being able to share our knowledge across all the 50 states.
Yeah, in addition to those 2 DNC meetings that we had to go to in person, our chair and vice chair were, can't say required, but invited to the ASDC meetings, if you can remember that from the alphabet soup. And they were somewhere else in the states all over. So that's, all of that's at their own money, our own expense that we have to do. Meredith, was your question related to this? Because we've got 3 slides left before we can open up to questions. But I'm happy to hear from you coming in from France.
I see her questions about tax reform, and let's get back to that at the end of the call. That would be.
Okay, so we will definitely get you, Meredith. We'll definitely get you. Another thing that Democrats Abroad DNC members do, we kind of touched on this. We vote on party platform, rules and bylaws. We submit. What resolutions have we submitted? We're not always successful, but we submitted a resolution on tax or something that they totally blew us off about, though, didn't they?
Well, I think we've submitted several resolutions in the past 3 years. And sometimes what will happen is your resolution, it's kind of like the zeitgeist. There'll be resolutions that are similar, and so the resolutions committee will combine them together.
Yeah.
And we can also add our names to other resolutions. And then if it gets through the resolutions committee, then the whole DNC body will vote on those resolutions.
Here's my last slide before we can open up to questions. And I need you guys, Martha, Ken, Katie, Julie, I need your help on that. Joe, where does the real power lie within the DNC? Because I think that's a big part of it. People think we're DNC they're members, and I don't know, but they think I don't know what kind of power they think that we have. As I say, my power comes from representing Democrats Abroad and telling your stories and making sure that you're there. And then lending our support to resolutions and things that we believe in and voting in officers and being a part of building the platform. But if you're on the executive committee, and executive committee consists of, the chair, the vice chairs, the secretary, treasurer. Joe was going to talk about finance. We can do that as well. The regional caucus chairs are on the executive committee. I believe the council and constituency chairs. Mm-hmm. The staff has a lot of power. That's right. Who else do you think, where do you guys feel the real power of the DNC lies?
The state party chairs, the ASDC.
ASDC.
They make up with 114 of them being DNC members, 2 from each party. That's a big chunk of DNC members right there.
Julie,
so we should have added that.
Say again.
Feel like your voice makes a difference at the DNC? You feel powerful?
In terms of the body, the chairs and the vice chairs do, I think, stand out in the body a bit. But I think, of course, the executive committee is going to be where, you have to get in those committees. You get on a committee, you can. If you're on the resolutions committee, any of the committees that Adrian was talking about, that's where you are really shaping things. Sometimes as Adrian said, we are working hard, we are voting, we are raising our voices, but we're not necessarily going to be shaping the entire DNC. We can get up and we really need to. We made a huge point in the last 3 years of standing up and for things that were not always going to be friendly for the DNC. We stood up for an environmental debate. We stood up, Ken and I were up there saying, we need to do this. The whole world is watching. That's why it's so important. They started chanting, the whole world is watching. In fact, when we said this, we stood up for the Unity Reform Commissions. But that, a lot of the work is done in committee in the DNC, and it's an important thing that we're working on is to get some of our members on some of these crucial committees.
We should take questions, and I just wanted to say one thing.
Adrienne, can I jump in for just a minute? Very interesting what Julia just had to say about our individual voices as our own state party, and her voice and Alex's as chair and vice chair. But my comment was about the group of chairs together, which totaled these 114 votes. I think that we should add that to that one slide.
And that's pretty much embodied by Ken Martin as in his role as representing you guys. He is considered an equal. You're absolutely right. He's the chair of the ASDC. He sits on the diet. He's on the executive committee. And his position exists because of the chairs and everything. So he's like the voice for you guys.
He also has this, this voting block, which is the biggest voting block there is. It's bigger than any state party, and it's bigger than any of the caucuses or anything else. If he can marshal 114 votes for something, that's big.
And I don't know if he does that with you guys in your meetings. I know I sat in a couple times because we don't have an executive director.
Sometimes he will. For example, like the letter we just sent to the DNC. So, we had, I'm not sure how many people have signed it because I signed it, but I didn't see the final numbers. But again, that could be 114 people plus executive directors. And not every state has an executive director, but, it's a fair number of people. EDs are not DNC members, but they do. They make such a big impact by the work that they do that they come to DNC meetings.
Yeah. One last thing before we take questions. I know, like part of that new DNC, I heard from other members that when we went to our first full DNC meeting, and after we had elected, I guess this was October, and Joe, you can touch on this later. They were talking about the finances, and his name was Henry Munoz, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly.
And he did a big presentation about the finances and. The microphones, we were told that before you couldn't get up on the microphone and talk as an individual DNC member, that they didn't do that. So I've never known a DNC that didn't. But there was one guy, and I think he was from North Carolina, and he's like, I've been a DNC member for 20 years, and I've never seen the finances. This is great. And I remember thinking two things. How can you be a DNC member for 20 years? And then second thing, how can you have never seen the finances? How was that never shown? So we've seen a lot of transparency that maybe we didn't even know what didn't exist before, and can look forward to if Jamie Harrison, if we do get to vote him in, or it would be interesting to see if he's opposed, whatever. We got to meet him when we were interviewing the chair candidates. He's a great guy. I can feel excited about that. But if we can take the questions, I know Meredith, but I don't know, Joel, if there was like a running list of questions, or I'm going to turn it back over to you now to moderate that, if you don't mind. And thank you so much for letting us do this.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to briefly interject myself here to say that we will have a queue for questions. If you want to ask a question, simply type * hand up into the chat box. You can either send that to everybody or just to me, and I will be keeping a queue and passing the question on to the next person in the queue. Maybe Rick can help me with that in case there are a lot of questions going into the queue. Yes, so let's have questions. I think the first one then is Meredith, and the second is Cheryl. Meredith?
Hi, everyone. Hi. My question, I've got two, actually. One is, I've never been clear, does Democrats abroad give any money to the DNC, or on contrary-wise, do we get funds from the DNC? That's question number one. And question number two is about progress on taxation for Americans abroad. It would be so good if we could bring this home. I know there are a lot of people who worked very hard on it, and I know it involves Congress, maybe not the DNC. But is the DNC, since our profile has been so raised, apparently in the DNC. I mean, we're claiming we're brought home Georgia and Arizona. Julia's giving, lectures to other states about how to do absentee ballots and so on, and Zoom meetings. Can't we marshal them to support Democrats abroad in this long campaign, which seems to go nowhere? Little incremental gains, but nothing ever happens. It would mean so much, I think, to our membership if we could finally bring that home.
Well, I can answer the finances and just talk a little bit about what we've been doing this year around the taxation. So in terms of finances, we pay dues to the Association of State Democratic Committees. So that's part of what we do for being part of that committee. The DNC does, from time to time, give us grants. So in 2017, they gave us grants for the Resistant Summer. You guys may remember that. And then in 2018, they gave us almost $80,000, I think it was, for what they call SPIF grants. Now this year, they didn't give us any grants in 2019. There was nothing really, for that. But in 2020, we went back to them, and of course we had a lot of proposals. I'm always working on my proposals, and I submitted them early, and went back over and over again about this, and they wound up giving us just a little bit of grant money. I was like, I'm not sure if it was worth the effort to write the proposal, but it's okay. It's good for you to have the language. And then of course they also have been paying for our the server that we host the wiki on, and then they're also paying for the cloud that we host that we will be moving the wiki on. So that's the support that they provide us. They also give we work with some of their staff. The Association of State Democratic Chairs have staff that is partially paid for, at least in part, by the DNC, and they're very supportive. We work with William Alexander, is one of our key supports within the DNC. He is just fantastic. If I need anything, like sometimes we'll send letters that we need to send to Congress. Just send to Will. He gets these letters printed out and shuttled over to Congress so it's hand delivered. It's really, and I mean that's just a small example. We work with them. I probably talk to Will like 2 or 3 times a week. That's that first. Does that answer that first question for you, Meredith?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, so the second question is about finance reform. Remember, the DNC is a party organization. The bills, Congress is who we really need to work with if we want to get stuff done in terms of the law. So we were really working hard with the Biden administration, making sure they understood the issues. Carmelyn and I sat down with some of the head economists from the Biden administration, explaining our issues, basically saying, okay, what will be palatable? What do you guys? We need you guys to understand these issues, and we are really trying hard to find areas that are just common sense reforms to the law. Because my answer on this is, okay, tax law is always complicated, and you guys, and the way the tax law is written right now is very bad for Americans abroad. You can make it just a little bit more friendly to us and solve a lot of problems. I don't think at the moment we're going to get, I don't think that we're going to have all of taxes thrown away. I don't think that's realistic, but there's a lot they can do to alleviate the sufferings of Americans abroad. And those things are not going to look like fat cat reforms, which is what they're always worried about. They're always worried about the optics. And if we go in there and we say, don't, here's something small that you can do that makes a huge difference. For example, moving to, right now, of course, we all have the foreign earned income exemption. Well, add unearned to that, and that makes a huge difference for a lot of people. And so that was one of the big things we were fighting for. And I think Carmelyn and I are already gearing up for, Carmelyn's actually been meeting with staffers, as she says, gosh, Julia, the staffers have so much free time during this campaign. They have nothing to do on the Hill. So I'm like, good for you, Carmelyn. I do not have that free time, but you meet with them, and then we'll start meeting with them in December. So we're going to start meeting again with them in December and January, and we're going to do virtual door knocks, which should be fun. And I think we're really aiming at making sure that if there's any tax bills that come up, we are going to be there ready with some common sense stuff that can help mitigate these issues.
Cheryl?
Hi, Cheryl. Boardman.
Cheryl? Maybe we can go on to Katie and come back to Cheryl.
Well, I can see Cheryl, but Cheryl, can we hear you?
She's trying to unmute, aren't you, Cheryl?
She is unmuted, but I can't hear her. Let's go on to Katie and come back to Cheryl. Is that okay?
Yeah, don't go away, Cheryl. Hang in there.
Well, I would just add to what Julia was saying about taxation. Residence-based taxation and these other small fixes are definitely on the legislative side. But as far as FATCA goes, for many years, our task force has been working, and our focus has been not on new legislation, but rather on changing the rules so that it doesn't have to go to Congress, it doesn't have to be passed there, but it's at Treasury. And then, the administration, for them to interpret the law that has already been passed in a way that would solve 90% of the problems. And that is the same country exclusion, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. You can go to our website and read beautiful pages written by Carmel Ann that spell this out very clearly. But if we would just consider the banks that we use to be local, if they happen to be in the country where we live, our surveys have shown us that 90% of the problems that overseas Americans face would be taken care of. And this wouldn't be legislative. It would be just a rule change on FATCA. And it's what we've been advocating for years, as have a number of other nonpartisan American citizen groups overseas. And it's still a path that, has possibilities, especially with the new administration. So I hope, and Joe's been on the task force forever since its founding, might have more thoughts on that. But is that the direction that we'll still be going?
Well, we will definitely be going down that direction because in theory, that's the easiest one. In all of the discussions we've had over the years, folks in the Hill say FATCA reform needs to come from Treasury. They have the power to do it. And Treasury says FATCA reform needs to come from Congress. They drafted the law. But in fact, the real answer is it's at Treasury. And I don't know what Janet Yellen's idea is going to be, but we have made some progress in getting Congress or Treasury at least to recognize that they can change the rule, and things like actually crazy. It's nothing to do with FATCA. The crazy legislation like the GILTI Act.
Yep. Oh, that's terrible.
Helps us argue to Treasury that they can do simple reforms that make sense and don't penalize overseas Americans otherwise. So the tax team will definitely be pursuing legislative reform as well as regulatory reform.
Treasury has not been the friendliest of places, as you guys can imagine, in the last few years. So especially, so that has not been the best spot for us to work with. We've had a lot more luck with our friends in the House. As you guys know, Dina Titus is a wonderful advocate for us, as is Jamie Raskin and a couple of other people who are key advocates for our work. And we're hoping that with the pandemic at the top of the mind, that's of course one of the first things that's going to that Congress is going to address with the new Congress. And so there should be some places there where we might be able to get in the door as well with that legislation. Thank you, Meredith. That was a great question.
Can we try Cheryl again?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay, I'll turn this chat thing off then. Okay, Joe. Whoever, but I was thinking Joe. I have three questions. One is, how does the president work with us if he's the like the head of our Democratic Party, how does he work with us? And also, if we don't have a Democratic president, then who is the leader of the Democratic Party? And these are really basic questions, but that's where I'm at. And my last thing is I really would like, besides the taxes and all that other stuff, but right at this very moment, I would really like the DA to sponsor a proposal to the president and the administration that the doctors, nurses, LPNs, ambulance drivers, and whoever else should be in that category have all of their school loans, I don't know what it's called, but erased. That's it. Joe, help with that?
Is that for me?
Yes, Joe.
Okay. So the answer to the first question is, well, actually, the answer to the second question is that who is the head of the party? The head of the party is any sitting Democratic president of the United States. But he's the head of and when there isn't a sitting president, then the head of the party is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. But to say what the party is something different, right? What is the party? The party is the Democratic Party of the United States. It meets under its charter once every 4 years, although it can meet more often if it wants to, right? That it meets in convention, right? And so and when the party is not in convention, then under the charter, it is run by the National Committee. So when you have in the period when you're not in convention, de facto, even when you have a sitting president, de facto, the head of the party is the chairman of the National Committee because she chairs that committee on a day-to-day, on a kind of day-to-day basis. Going back to the first question is, how does the president interact with the party? Well, even though the president may be the head of the Democratic president may be the titular head of the party, she is not, or he in this case, because it's going to be Biden, will not be involved in the day-to-day workings. And so there is a liaison between the executive branch, White House, the political folks in the White House, and the DNC. Most of the time, historically speaking, most of the time, the policies of the Democratic president would also be strongly followed by the DNC, but not always, because the state Democratic chairs, we've mentioned them before, do have a large voice in the DNC, and occasionally there will be some tension and conflict between something that the president wants to do and which the other leaders of the party want to do. He may be the leader, but he's not the dictator of the absolute thing. And there's often, and sometimes it also depends on Congress. We hopefully will have, God willing, have two victories in Georgia, and maybe hopefully control Congress. But sometimes the president has to negotiate with the Republicans, even though the party doesn't necessarily like that. Leaders, how do they work? Well, they talk to each other all the time, and there is a liaison constantly between the party and the executive branch. But it's not always 100%. Okay. And the president, by the way, can't fire the chairman of the DNC. Good. He can make it he can make a lot of noise about it. But the president doesn't get to fire the chair of the DNC, just as he doesn't get to name the chair. He will put forward a name, and as Katie said, pretty hard to oppose that. But in fact, he's not a dictator. And on the third question, I leave it up to the chair, to our chair, and to say, you know, I mean, it's an interesting idea whether we can forgive the student loans of all of the first responders and people who are dealing with COVID. Biden does have some programs to deal with student loans in any event, and we can take that into account.
Well, and so here are our options as DNC members. We can put together a resolution that we then present at the next DNC meeting and ask, as we mentioned before, we can ask that the resolutions committee review it and decide whether or not they're going to put it up for a vote by the DNC body. That's what we can do as DNC members. As Democrats abroad, we can also say, okay, this is an action we want to take up as a and throw our voices behind other groups who are also asking for this, and get our members to get in touch with their Congress people and push for it. Because again, what do we know about Congress? Our congressional representatives, they want to hear from their constituents. It's very important that we, as a body, can push their constituents to get in touch with Congress and push for certain reforms. So these are the two major ways we have of pushing that reform through. And the second one is probably a bit faster. I would definitely faster. But it again needs to have. I would say that it would be much more successful if there are other groups already doing that, because our voices are very. We have a lot of voters, but they're quite scattered across a lot of different groups, and so when we join forces with other organizations, we add our voices just like we do with the votes in every election.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking that the first one didn't sound like it ever fly.
It wasn't. It's not a very fast solution, that's for sure. Yep.
Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you so much for this evening. It's been wonderful, interesting, and I see that I have to go and do some studying.
Oh, okay. Well, very nice to meet you. And one thing I wanted to say before everybody goes, Adrienne is an amazing DNC member, and I think she is one of the people who really is the glue who holds our DNC team together. I can't tell you what a wonderful networker she is. Everyone knows Adrienne. You have to. Yes. Very important. I kind of follow her along behind her because it's so wonderful to be working the room with Adrienne and hundreds of people. I think we come back with maybe 1,000 cards after every one of these meetings. It's just really fun. And she's a remarkable person to have on the team. So thank you, Adrienne, for inviting us.
Thank you for coming. Thanks, Joel. Thanks for coming. I still tell you some story. What next, Joel?
Yes, you are.
Because I'm afraid I'm going to forget. Because what is that caucus? Is it the Americans Abroad Caucus that we can ask these Congress people to be in? What is that called? And it's in the House, right? And how do we get these people on board? I know Titus is on it, and Carolyn in New York, and so is this the time now with the freshman class? We're like, get on the Americans Abroad Caucus.
In fact,
that's what we have our constituents do.
It's a and also especially one of the things that we are starting to do now is we are putting up a section on the website where people can send in their stories about various progressive legislation, and to help our leaders back in the United States, like with the healthcare, with public transportation, with the environment, et cetera. And this is a great way for us to help them, and also for them to remember who we are, so that they can help us on things that are maybe not top of their mind, but it's just it's a great relationship that we can put together. Like we're going to be working with Jamal Bowman, for example, on stories. We're working with Ted Lieu and a couple of other representatives that we really got to know this year. And by they need, some of these guys are leading stuff on fast trains, for example. And so we nothing tells a story in Congress better than hearing from one of your constituents about how normal and useful a fast train is in your life. And the same thing is true about health insurance. We're the largest constituency of any American group around the world who understands the value of universal health care. So these are all ways that we can create that relationship.
But Julia,
and ask them to join the American Caucus.
But Julia, okay, thank you. That's the thing. So we as individual members should ask our congressman from our state to join. But then I don't know if it's the thing that DA would do when we meet other DA members say, hey, your representative is not on the American Caucus. I just wasn't sure the best way we can build up that caucus.
And right now it's a little bit, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's a little bit defunct. Is that your feeling as well?
Oh.
Well, I mean, the caucuses, so these caucuses are like the Americans Abroad caucus. My puppy has woken up.
Ooh.
And he's
Mr. Smith.
This is Mr. Smith, and hopefully he'll be going to Washington shortly. So the caucuses, many of the caucuses are nonpartisan, and so the Americans Abroad caucus has a chair, a Republican and a Democratic chair, and the current Democratic chair has been distracted, and the Republican chair lost his election. So it has to be reconstituted in January, and there is some talk about changing the leadership of the caucus on the Democratic side to someone who's a little bit more less distracted and more interested in our issues. We'll see how that happens. It basically requires the senior member.
Oh, you went mute, Joe. Joe, you're mute.
Dog.
The puppy must have muted him.
Mute. Yes, you don't want me talking. Is that what you don't want me talking? Okay.
So, Joe, will Jamie do it?
Well, either we're going to get. My guess is either Jamie or Dina Titus.
Yep.
They've both been very, very active, and I think it will depend on what other leadership positions they get. Jamie may be too busy, frankly, because he's in senior leadership now, even though he's not. He's only going into his third term.
Right.
Dina may have a little bit more time, a little bit. None of them really have that much time, and
she calls herself the patron saint of Democrats Abroad.
Yeah, so I think one or the other. I think will be a.
She was at a meeting. Yeah. This is for people who didn't know. She was at our 2016 meeting in Berlin, and Jamie Raskins is a former Democrats Abroad France member who is a Maryland representative.
And Maryland representatives.
And he was also a delegate at the 2004 convention for Democrats Abroad, too.
Yep.
And I voted for him. My first DNC, first CPCA meeting. Can I add a couple responses to Cheryl's questions? The first thing that I want to say,
still here.
The first thing I wanted to say about us doing a resolution, it can be a slow process and really a fruitless process at the DNC, but it can go fast if there are other state parties and other DNC members that are hot on this issue, and they very well may be. I mean, we came out fast at the DNC on police brutality when we needed to. Also, though, you have to consider we came out when we had a Republican White House and we were the Democratic Party, so we could come out really strong. Now we're going to have a Democratic White House, and so there's going to be debate in the DNC. Do we push Biden on things or do we follow his lead, right? And that will be a debate in the DNC, and it will be a loud one, I hope, because that's the kind of debates we're having now, very transparent ones. Two other points I'm going to make quickly is, who's the head of the party? As Joe said, if we have the White House, yes. But when we didn't have the White House, there were rumors within the DNC when I was there about who was the head. Was it Debbie Wasserman Schultz or was it Nancy Pelosi? Because, especially when she became speaker again. And in fact, were there some proxy wars going on within the party as they tried to jockey for that position? But, these were just the tail end of little rumors that I didn't have much access to. But now my final point is now we do have a Democratic president, or we will. And one of the weaknesses of the DNC, we thought, as we came into 2016, was the fact that Obama didn't pay a lot of attention to the party during his whole 8 years. He didn't come in with party help. You know, he didn't feel like he got a lot of party help to be reelected. If you remember people stepping back from him in 2012 and then he wins and they don't. Do you remember that? So there was also talk that he didn't, grow and support the party during his term. So my final comment is, hope to God that Joe Biden is going to be that president that does realize the importance of the party reaching out to every zip code, as Tom Perez says, every county in the U.S., and that he indeed will make sure we get a brilliant party chair, and that he gives the support from the White House that we need to make sure that we can keep moving forward and fight for the issues that we believe in and win elections, especially down ballot in 2022 and 24 and 26. And the party's got to be a part of it. So, yeah.
I just want to say hi, Art. That's how the Joel had his hand. Hi, Art.
Yeah, I wanted to also say a couple of times, and I'm sorry I didn't, but Art Shankler is also a former DNC member. He served as vice chair of Democrats Abroad from 2016 for nearly a year. And yeah, Art, what of all the things we've talked about would you jump in and comment on?
Well, I would go on video, but I'm lying on my bed, so I won't do that. Very well. I'm dressed, but whatever. I don't know. It's I think Democrats abroad, given their numbers and everything else, are indeed the most visible part of the DNC. Certainly the ASDC, and I think the DNC as well. I think, as people have said, there's all of the members have a high visibility rate with the other parties. I think everyone is sort of slightly fascinated by Democrats abroad. Lots of people like to travel outside the country, so they're all, incredibly amazed about people who actually live outside of the country and are still part of the Democratic Party. And that's something that we can use to our benefit and have used to our benefit. The relationships that have been built up, particularly during the election season, are crucial to cementing it and helping us do what we want to do, not only in getting out the vote, but also in moving forward on issues that affect Americans abroad and Democrats abroad. I saw a message today about distribution of vaccines to Americans abroad. Could be a very important issue.
Was that the press thing, or where was that, Art?
Yeah, it was a message coming into press.
Oh, yeah.
A very interesting issue for those of us who are concerned about getting COVID and would like to get the vaccine as soon as possible when it's available. So these are all issues that we can raise, and I think because of our visibility and high profile, we'll get a welcome hearing amongst the people who decide these things. So thanks very much. I still won't go on video. Thank you.
Are you in Serbia?
I am in
or?
Serbia. So I don't know. They have announced they'll have a vaccine by the end of the year. So who knows what will sorry if I seem obsessed by COVID, but we have North Dakota like numbers here at the moment. So.
Sorry to hear that.
I wonder if I might jump. In with 3 questions. The first one is, I was amazed how many of my friends back in the United States didn't think that I had any right to vote at all, and in fact took it as a form of electoral fraud that I was voting for the U.S. president, even though I wasn't living in the U.S. And I wonder if somebody, you, Adrian, or somebody from the DNC might speak to that. The second question is to everyone. and that's simply to ask if we have any Georgia voters on the call tonight. I meant to ask that earlier, and I forgot. And the third question, again, specifically to Adrian or the other members of the DNC on the call tonight, what message do you have for Georgia voters as DNC members to our DA members who are Georgia voters? Thank you.
Well, I think I've Rick, Joel, I think to Rick, but to Joel, and part of my storytelling, like the story when he was thinking about citizenship, because he still has to file his taxes and still has to register to select the service. So our sons that are born abroad still have the same obligations as the sons that are born on American soil. You know, that's, you know, they're not doing us any favor letting us vote, you know. And it's, you know, I don't know, Joe may know this, when it was established that was a right. You know, I don't know if that hasn't always been a thing. I'm not a historian, but I know in our modern times, our sons are subjected to the same circumstances as their sons when it comes to select a service. All of us need to be filing our taxes. All of us don't know that. All of us need to be filing our taxes. So, you know, we've got those obligations, and with citizenship comes the right to vote. So, as far as, you know, and the people that say that question you, they don't know that, and hopefully you have enough, you know enough to answer that, hopefully. But you know, those same questions will come up in 2022. They'll come up if we flip Georgia, or when we flip Georgia with the overseas vote. You know, so we know that we have the right to vote. Our thing is trying to get more overseas workers to exercise that vote. So I want to say that everybody was called to their part to bring out that vote, that overseas vote in 2020, and thank you. And I know that one reason Joel is asking for Georgia voters, because he wants to have somebody from Georgia come and talk next time that this DA Western Swing gets together. And what would I tell them? I'm currently co-hosting the Georgia on Our Minds series of the Democrats Abroad, Global Black Caucus, Power to the People podcast. Man, that was a lot to say. But me and Angela Fobbs, who is the chair of the Democratic Black, the DA Global Black Caucus, she's in Germany. We hosted a lot pre-election. She said, you know, let's do this for Georgia. So I have found several Americans that live overseas. We had somebody from France. We had somebody today from Australia. We're going to have somebody Tuesday from Australia. We had a former DA, regional vice chair for the Asia Pacific, Britt Farbo, come on. She's in Savannah on the ground, Warnock's town. She knows what's going on there. She came and talked to us. We've got, hopefully on Monday, the Luisa Cardona, who is the Warnock representative, Warnock campaign's Latinx representative, or reaching out to that community. Also, Jason, so bad with names, Estevez. He's going to talk, because he's in the Georgia State Party, Democratic Party, talk about the Latino vote. So I would tell them that, you know, Georgia's sexy. If it wasn't sexy before, Georgia is sexy now. The whole world is watching Georgia. The whole world understands the balance of power that's on the ballot. The whole world is waiting to see how we're going to resolve this because our election isn't resolved. So everyone is looking at, you know, those Georgia, those people that had to count the ballots the first time. They're going to count them again, and I think they have to count them again. Yeah. And so I'm telling people that, you know, every 17-year-old out there in Georgia, you missed out. You missed out. You got to ask for that party's better than party. You got to ask the party. You're going to help change the Senate. For the Americans, the Georgians, who maybe have never had a lesson with their 17-year-old that's going to be 15 come January 5th, this is the time you sit them down. Do it over Thanksgiving and say, hey, you know what, I never talked American politics to you before, but you know what? You're going to be the people that they're going to be talking about. You know, they know, all the Georgians that
Adrian,
live abroad, maybe 20 years
You're breaking up a little bit. You're breaking up a bit.
I'm sorry, but tell them, Joel. There's other reasons why they shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're really an example of where we're at right now, which is, you know, like such passion and such like, you know, we just had an election and we don't skip a beat, like we keep going, right? You know, I mean, that's really, really extraordinary. I think on the first point, Joel, I mean, voter suppression is very insidious, and it includes people with their opinions about who is a valid voter and who is not a valid voter. And actually, it is up. We don't have federal elections. We only have state elections, and it's up to states to decide whether we abroad get a full ballot or not, right? And it's about the state setting rules, and that is just the Constitution, right? But I think it's really up to all of us to also recognize that kind of, you know, sometimes undercurrent of voter suppression that is inside of what people are talking about. And also there's so much talk. I mean, I always say we are the dead voters, right? All these like ballots that get counted, you know, days and weeks after election day, you know, we know that's us, right? And we know that we're valid voters, and we know that it's really important to send that message. But, you know, I'm missing right now in all of this noise, like about whose vote should be counted or whatever, is all the people that we saw. I was on the voter protection desk. I was getting the incoming messages, like all of the, you know, small obstacles. They're not small for a voter, but they're really easy for an election office to do that just make it too difficult, right? They have people give up. You know, I had somebody yesterday, I mean, we're the Georgia voters now, right, who is being blocked, right? He's in the country, he's in Hong Kong, and he can't get through to download his ballot, right? And Georgia isn't going to do anything about that. So we have to find, like, individual ways to fix it, right? So I think it's really one of our jobs. I mean, because we are sort of the invisible voters, the voters that people don't know about, and we are that margin of victory, is to really stand up for every voter, like including ourselves, including, you know, all of us as a community, but also all the voters that are encountering these like so-called little things, whether it's an election office being closed where you have to, you know, stand for 7 hours, or whether that you're standing in the cold. I mean, I had a friend in Maine, and, you know, her job, she's a professor, you know, her job was to like bring hot drinks and pizza to people so that they like didn't get discouraged. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. You know, in the Netherlands, I cannot explain this to anybody because it is so centralized and so easy and so straightforward to vote. But this is an incredible community mobilization that we are to make it possible, like every one of us to vote. And I just think we should be really proud of that. And, you know, people will have their opinions about who should vote, and it's a lot of noise, right? But we should really be bringing that other message about how passionate our voters are abroad to vote, and how much we really care about our country, and that we are America, right? Anyway, I could go on, but I think that it's really important that we just recognize voter suppression when we see it.
Katie,
well,
please.
Martha, that was so well said. It's hard to even go anywhere besides hit the leave meeting button, but thank you for that. My message to Georgia voters would be vote, of course, first. Make sure that you vote. It would be thank you for voting in November if you did, because you provided the margin for Biden. And it would be to spread the word to your family and friends and anybody else from Georgia in any way that you can, because we know there are more voters out there abroad, especially, but there are more voters in Georgia. You know, we didn't have 100% turnout. So it would be vote, spread the word, and it would be, yes, we can help. We're standing by. We can help with just about anything. And then I think the final thing I would say is, I wrote to the former chair of the Georgia party right after they won in November, and I worked with him over the last, you know, several years. I've known him for, I guess, 10 years or something, less than that, whatever. They've been working in Georgia for this. They've been working towards it. They knew they were on the verge of being able to deliver a Democratic victory, and they did. And his response to me immediately after, I thought, was really something. He said, now we know we can. So my message to Georgia voters were, you can. You did this in November. You know that your state can do this. You're not on the verge anymore. You're there. So just keep it going. Keep it going in January. because our whole country is depending on you. The world, I guess, also, but the country is watching and we're counting on you. Thanks.
Maybe Julia could jump in quick, and then maybe it's close time to wrap up.
Sorry.
Julia,
I went and grabbed this thing really fast. But what I would say is there's some wonderful, the major thing is for everybody to understand how to vote in Georgia. It can be a little tricky. And so we have some great top-line messaging for both Georgia voters and for other Americans. I would love to share that information with you. We have one-pagers. We have great stuff on social. If you guys are on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, definitely go to our @DemsAbroad channels and find that material and totally share it all over the place. If you know a Georgia voter and you are not comfortable with all the details, never fear. Just call that person up and say, you're a Georgia voter, we need you right now. The top line messaging is that it's December 5th is registration deadline, and voters really need to get their ballots sent in ASAP because, of course, December is going to be a disaster with the mail. We're recommending people courier their ballot back in December. So these are all just like practical GOTV points, and we're really happy to share all of that information. If you guys want we can send you guys the one pager that we're sending out to everybody. I'll send to you, Joel, and I really recommend everybody having that at your fingertips. And thank you for your GOTV work, because that's really important. That's, I just want y'all, I'm not sure if you are aware of these numbers, but this year we sent basically 3 times the number of people to vote from abroad that we did in 2016. And because of that, we were able to increase the overseas vote in Georgia. We increased it by almost 50% over 2016. And we probably did that all across the United States. If we hadn't done the work that we did this year, guess what would have happened? We would not have won the White House. It's because of you guys getting out there, doing that GOTV, and working so hard, increasing our outreach to voters abroad, that we were able to, frankly, save the world. And I want to thank you guys for all of that.
And just so you know, get out the vote. I know
GOTV is get out
we're the people, right?
Yep. I used to think it was like GoTV. I was like, why is this a Democratic thing? But yeah.
Exactly.
Cheryl, do you want to?
Any last questions before we go? I'm starving.
Yeah, Cheryl, do you want to hop in to follow up on that question you were asking in the chat?
You're muted, sweetie.
Thank you, Joel. Can you hear me now? Okay. Apparently, unmuting myself doesn't work. Only Joel can unmute me. Anyway, yes, I was asking. Okay, in the past, the votes from abroad and the military votes have been like counted last, and I mean weeks later in some states, and now recently, because of everybody pretty much being, I can't say everybody, but because the Republicans did, but anyway. Because so many Democrats did say we're voting by mail, the states also seem to have more interest in getting the votes counted beforehand, since it was going to be such a horrendous job. So maybe in the future we will have more of the votes counted beforehand, but we need to get more of them counted beforehand. We can't have this system where I'm sorry, but I don't think we can continue to have this system where states don't start counting until the day of the election, and that they save the votes from abroad until the very last day of, like the 13th of November or the 10th of November. They can't be doing that.
Well, that's a great point, Cheryl. And every state has a different law for this. So for example, in Florida, one of the reasons that Florida was, we knew a lot of the results pretty early on in Florida is because they start counting their overseas ballots 22 days ahead of time. And so I was actually hearing from some people in the Florida Democratic Party, because they had people watching. They're like, their numbers, the overseas, these numbers of overseas votes have already come in, and it's looking, and they can't announce the results ahead of time, but they can start counting ahead of time. And they had watchers watching, and it was making them feel very positive. But, that's, of course, what we know what happened in Florida. But every single state is different. One of the challenges, and we knew Pennsylvania was going to be really late, is they can't start counting until the same day. And so this is all has to do with state ledge. We need to get in there. That's one of the really important things about voting down ballot and making sure everyone's voting down ballot is flipping those state legislators and getting in better voter laws so that people can start counting earlier. And we know that vote by mail is probably going to, it's very popular, and we've all just figured this out that, my God, why is it an election day one day? It should be a month. It's so hard to get out a huge population on one day. You need to have a much longer period of time. So that's a really good question.
So to follow up on that, Cheryl, it is state law. So they can do it because their state law instructs them to do it in a certain way. Florida was an early counter. Arizona, where I'm sitting right now, started counting on October 20th. They started voting on October 7th with early voting and mail-in voting here, domestically. And so they had all this big bucket of votes that were the early votes, the early mail-in ballots, and the overseas votes. All of those were counted up until November 1st, and they were announced at 8 p.m. on election night. They were announced before all of the election day votes, and we were way ahead. And in Arizona, they announced in what party affiliation cast what number of votes. So we didn't know that they voted for Democrats, but we know that Democrats cast about 2/3 of those early votes. So it was amazing, and we started flying high in Arizona. Election day then turned out to be a different thing. But it is state law, and we do need to try to change state law. Sometimes the last point is they have intentionally made it difficult. Pennsylvania is the case to look at. First time that they did mail-in voting this time, they fought about it at the state legislature. They didn't want to do it. They knew it was going to open up to a much higher turnout. Republicans know if there's higher turnout, they're going to lose. They managed to pass this postal voting for the first time, mail-in votes, and then they intentionally set the law to make it hard to count those votes. They intentionally set the law that they couldn't open envelopes until Election Day. So it wasn't accidental that they had problems counting in Pennsylvania. It was intentional on the part of the Republican legislature, and let's go forward in 2022 and 2024 and win back these important legislatures that are making these critical decisions. Yeah. Thanks for that very good question.
Do we have time for one more question?
I think so.
Okay. How can we get the rules for the what is it called now? The Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. We need to improve that process and take away this bipartisan business. Those people need to be simply professionals, I think. And this business of them being able to decide strange things that they shouldn't be deciding at all. We need to get that stuff. And also this process of them being when the document, the original document was written, people only had a lifespan to about 65 maybe or something like that on average. Now people are living to average of 80 something. These people need to be able to retire. I think so. I would like to put some kind of age limit on them and some kind of term limit, maybe 20 years or something like that, so that they can't be having such an influence on the United States for so long. Anyway, is there something the DNC can do about that, please?
Well, my understanding is that that's something that requires a change in the Constitution. Yes.
Yes, let's change the Constitution. Yes, but we need to put a proposal out there to get that changed. Again,
this is something that our legislature has to do. and so we can definitely address that again. Democrats Abroad has done a lot of work in the last few years on pushing for legislative reform. And, again, some of the best ways to do that is to work together with other groups who are pushing for this, adding our voices and pushing our voters to talk to their constituents. And, I'm sure that this is, we are actively, we've been working on, for example, of course, another issue that I'm sure we are all very, very keen on is to get rid of the Electoral College. So, for example, in Colorado, it was up for, it was one of the topics being discussed in the election. Katie's a former Colorado voter, and so we actually sent a letter out to all of our Colorado voters saying, hey, look, make sure you're aware of this when you're voting this year. So when it does come to being a ballot measure, we can talk about it that way. We can also, again, talk about it through the activism that we do.
Good.
We have
exactly, Cuthbert.
Yeah. Cuthbert?
Has Alaska? No, you're not an Alaska voter. Cuthbert, where do you vote in?
Oh, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I voted in California. But this election, right? But this, the Electoral College is the one that caused the problems in 2000 and 2016, right? So that should get a real higher priority, somehow, somewhere to get rid of it. But I know they have to make a change to the Constitution in order to get that. And they have a lot of the small Republican states that are going to oppose it.
Well, I think national popular vote, you can actually do it on if you get a certain number of states in favor of it, then that's why it was really good that Colorado voted for it, to go for the national popular vote.
Yeah, right. That's not the same as eliminating the Electoral College. That's just individual states making their choices to do that.
It would have the same effect,
yes.
Cuthbert. In the end, if you got the majority of Electoral College votes to be in states that had passed this, then it would have the same effect of doing away with the Electoral College.
Right, but there would still be states, a lot of small Republican states that would not necessarily go along with it, but I guess they would be Republican anyway. But
I don't think it requires a constitutional change. That's why it makes it better. Katie's right on that.
I mean, the point would be that you would want the popular vote to choose the president. And if national popular vote passed in only a few more states, I think 16 states have passed it already, with a considerable number of Electoral College votes sitting in those states. If you got over the 270 mark, then the Electoral College would still exist, but the result would be that the president would be chosen by the popular vote.
Have any of those close states like Pennsylvania or Georgia or Wisconsin, Michigan done this?
I don't know, but Colorado considered it in 2004 when I was a Colorado voter. I didn't have that name then, but they considered directing their Electoral College votes to go to the popular vote, or to split like they do in Nebraska and Maine and other places. And I remember sitting there in November of 2004 thinking, this is close. If Kerry wins Colorado, I want him taking all the Electoral College votes. He's going to need them. And I thought he was going to win, and I think it was a great idea, and it was, very democratic, but I chose really in order to give Kerry all those votes, and I voted against it. And then he just barely lost Colorado. If you remember, we went to bed and we thought he was winning, and we woke up and he had lost Colorado. So he lost all of those Electoral College votes.
But do you know if any of those swing states that I mentioned are also doing this in their states to go with the popular vote?
Look at the link and you'll see that it has a map of some of the states, of all of the states that have participated.
It's about 16, but it's not enough. It's not enough of the critical or big ones to make it work yet. But it's a huge movement. Many, many people are working on this in many of the states.
I think it's
a couple of people in Democrats Abroad as well. We have a person in Germany who's on this all the time.
Okay, well, I think they would need 2/3 of the Senate to ratify it, and then 3/4 of the states, I believe, in order to change the Constitution. So that has historically had a good impact that it's harder for a dictator to just take over and change the Constitution and put themselves in power for life. So it's had that good impact, but it has the negative impact that it's hard to change anything. So we have an old kind of almost outdated electoral political system that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And where most countries now have a parliamentary system, we have a kind of something based on the old English House of Lords and House of Commons kind of thing, which even the UK still has, but the House of Lords has only doesn't really have a legislative, I don't think, role any longer. It's just some kind of legalistic thing or something, So even they have changed over time. So, but it's good and bad sides, I guess. The way changes can be made.
Well, the good news is that there are 196 electoral votes for it now, which is great. We have to get to 270, and there are a couple that are pending. If you'll notice in the map. So, this is a super duper thing for us to be, pushing for, and again, and advocating when it does come up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's the ERA you're talking about.
No, we're talking about the electoral vote, the national popular vote. Sorry, the ERA again, of course. We are also working.
That would also take change the Constitution. Yeah. All right. So.
Cuthbert, was that your question? Because I know you had your hand up. Was that your question?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay. People are starting to leave, so perhaps this is a good time to wind down. I wonder if I might pass back over to you, Adrian, to make a short closing statement.
Sure. My internet's working. I want to thank my colleagues for coming on. I could see at 8:04 or something, Joe said that he had to leave, but I wanted to thank Joe and Katie, Ken. I don't know if Ken's still in there from Canada, and Martha from the Netherlands, and Julia and Prague. Thank you so much for coming and supporting and illustrating how well we work together, how we need each other, how passionate we are about what we do, and how seriously we take our responsibility to represent everyone that's on this call. I want to thank my colleagues that came in from the UK and from France, as well as Stephanie and Meredith, and we have people from Germany, the DA chair, Cuthbert, and from Denmark, my neighbor. I want to thank Western Sweden and everyone else, and my mother, and couldn't do it without God. No, I'm thankful for everything in this weird year of 2020. I'm counting this as one of my COVID blessings, that we can have this conversation together with our DNC members. I'm so sorry that the AP people couldn't be here. Thanks to Sweden. The West Coast really is the best coast, guys. And I can't wait till we're all together again.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so
everybody,
much, Adrian.
Y'all have a great weekend. Happy Thanksgiving.
Everybody. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Gobble.
Happy holidays. Happy holidays.
Oh, 1 second. There we go. Good. Okay. So I'm going to turn off the recording now.